From colonial militiamen armed with muskets to the atomic bomb being dropped on 2 Japanese cities, this is how every major war that built America actually played out. And spoiler, while some wars were fought for noble ideals, others were fought for territory, trade, and things most people don't even know about. But first, let's start at the beginning with the conflict that literally birthed the nation, the American Revolutionary War. Most people think the American Revolution started because colonists were angry about taxes. And yeah, taxes were definitely part of it, the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, all that stuff. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Britain was actually bankrupt. They had just spent a fortune fighting the French in the French and Indian War, and they needed the American colonies to help pay for it. So they started taxing everything. And the colonists, who had never really been taxed by Parliament before, absolutely lost it. It's kind of ironic when you think about it. Britain fought to protect America from the French, and then America fought to escape from Britain. But the actual war was way more complicated than what you see in history textbooks. George Washington wasn't some invincible genius. He actually lost more battles than he won. In fact, at the Battle of Long Island in 1776, Washington's Continental Army got absolutely destroyed. He lost over 1,000 soldiers in a single day. And yet somehow, through a series of crazy luck and strategic retreats, Washington managed to keep the army alive long enough for something miraculous to happen. Because here's where it gets wild. France entered the war, not because they cared about American freedom. They entered because they wanted to stick it to Britain. France and Britain had been rivals for centuries, and France saw an opportunity to weaken their enemy by helping the colonists. French soldiers, French ships, French money, all of it flooded into America. And with French support, Washington's ragtag Continental Army actually stood a chance. The decisive moment came at Yorktown in 1781, where French troops and American forces surrounded the British Army. When General Cornwallis surrendered, the British general supposedly ordered his band to play a song called "The World Turned Upside Down." Because that's exactly what happened. A collection of farmers, blacksmiths, and merchants had just defeated the most powerful military on Earth. Britain recognized American independence in 1783, and suddenly, a brand new nation existed. But here's where things get interesting. Right after winning independence, Americans realized they had a massive problem, and it wasn't the British anymore. Just 30 years after becoming a nation, America declared war on Britain again. But this war was nothing like the first one. This time, America actually invaded British territory, specifically Canada. And the reason? America wanted to expand northward. They thought they could just walk into Canada, take over, and add it to their growing empire. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. The War of 1812 is honestly one of the weirdest wars in American history because nobody really won. Britain was busy fighting Napoleon in Europe, so they didn't send their best troops to North America. America sent militia and regular soldiers expecting an easy victory. Instead, it became a stalemate. There were naval battles on the Great Lakes, there were raids on American towns, and there was a battle at New Orleans where Americans' troops, commanded by a general named Andrew Jackson, absolutely decimated a British force using a creative defensive strategy involving cannons and earthworks. But here's the kicker. That fame would eventually propel him to the presidency. Funny how that works. But here's something absolutely wild that most Americans have completely forgotten about. Before America was fighting the British again, before it was expanding westward, it was already fighting overseas. And the enemy wasn't a nation, it was pirates. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, American merchant ships were getting attacked across the Mediterranean Sea. But these weren't normal pirates looking for treasure. These were Barbary corsairs, state-sponsored pirates from North Africa operating out of Morocco, Algiers, Tunisia, and Tripoli. And they were doing something absolutely horrifying. They were capturing American sailors and selling them into slavery. Think about that for a second. America had just fought a revolution for freedom, and then American sailors were being enslaved in North Africa. It was a nightmare scenario that nobody talks about in history class. The Barbary corsairs operated with the permission of their governments. The government would get a cut of the profits. It was basically legalized piracy. Ships would be captured, crews would be enslaved or ransomed, and the American government was basically helpless to stop it. For years, America tried to negotiate and pay ransoms. They paid hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get their sailors back, but it never solved the problem. The pirates would just capture more ships and demand more ransoms. It was extortion on a massive scale. So in 1801, President Thomas Jefferson had enough. He did something radical. Instead of paying ransoms, he sent the U.S. Navy to fight back. And this is where it gets interesting because the Barbary Wars became America's first major military action on foreign soil. Before fighting Germans in Europe, before fighting Japanese in Asia, America's first overseas war was against Barbary pirates in Africa. The wars lasted on and off for over a decade. American naval ships would patrol the Mediterranean, engaging corsair fleets in combat. There were naval battles, ship-to-ship combat, and even a famous incident where American soldiers landed in Tripoli to raid a fort. That Tripoli raid became so famous, it's literally mentioned in the Marine Corps hymn, "From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli." By 1815, after years of fighting and negotiation, the Barbary states agreed to stop attacking American ships. They had been convinced that America's navy was too powerful to mess with. Almost nobody remembers this war today. It's completely overshadowed by the bigger conflicts that came later. But at the time, it was a massive deal. It proved that America's new navy could project power across an ocean. It showed that America would use military force to protect its interests abroad. The Barbary Wars essentially created the template for American military interventions overseas. Go to a distant location, use superior technology and organization, accomplish the objective, and then leave. It's a pattern America would repeat dozens of times over the next 2 centuries. And while some presidents were busy fighting pirates in the Mediterranean, others were busy fighting over something much closer to home. And while the War of 1812 was pretty inconclusive, the next conflict that built America was absolutely devastating. It tore the nation apart in ways nobody could have imagined. By the mid-1800s, America had a problem it couldn't ignore anymore. The North was industrializing rapidly. Factories, railroads, cities. The North was becoming a modern economic powerhouse. The South, meanwhile, was agricultural, massive plantations, slavery, and a completely different economy built on slave labor. The two regions had completely different visions for America, and for a while, they tried to compromise. But compromises only delay the inevitable. The moment Abraham Lincoln got elected in 1860 on a platform that threatened slavery, Southern states decided they were done compromising. They seceded from the Union. They formed the Confederate States of America, and they were ready to fight for it. What started on April 12, 1861 at Fort Sumter was supposed to be a quick war. Both sides thought it would be over in a few months. The North thought the South would surrender quickly. The South thought northern states wouldn't actually fight their brothers. Both sides were catastrophically wrong. The Civil War lasted 4 years, 4 absolutely brutal years. More than 620,000 soldiers were dead. That's more Americans than died in World War II, Vietnam, and Korea combined. Families were literally split apart. Brothers fought brothers. Fathers fought sons. It was the most destructive conflict America had ever experienced. And the weird part? The actual battles themselves were incredibly shocking to people who had never seen industrial warfare before. At the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, over 50,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured in just 3 days. Soldiers watching their friends get blown apart by cannon fire, seeing fellow soldiers with limbs amputated. It was nightmarish, but through all this carnage, Abraham Lincoln held the nation together. He was elected president to preserve the Union, not to end slavery. So he issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, declaring enslaved people in Confederate states to be free. This essentially turned the Civil War into a war about slavery, which completely changed its meaning. When the Civil War finally ended in 1865, over 620,000 Americans were dead. The South was destroyed economically, its cities were burned, its farmland was devastated. Millions of formerly enslaved people were suddenly free, but nobody really knew what to do about it. The nation was traumatized. But out of that trauma came something important: the understanding that the United States was going to be one united nation, not two separate ones, and slavery was going to be abolished. Those weren't small things. But you know what's interesting? While America was tearing itself apart over slavery, the nation was also tearing into indigenous peoples out west. And if the Civil War was brutal, the Indian Wars were absolutely relentless. From the moment European colonists landed on North American soil, they started taking indigenous land. But for the first 100 years after American independence, the US government actually had a relatively hands-off approach. They signed treaties with Native American tribes. They created reservations. It was still stealing land, but at least it was happening through official government channels. But then, in the 1870s and 1880s, something changed. Americans became obsessed with manifest destiny, this idea that America had a God-given right to expand all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And if Native Americans were in the way, well, tough luck. The U.S. military systematized the removal and elimination of Native Americans. General William Tecumseh Sherman, the same guy who marched through the South burning everything during the Civil War, became the commanding general of the U.S. Army, and he basically declared war on the Great Plains tribes. The strategy was brutal and effective. First, the military killed off the buffalo herds. Buffalo were essential to the survival of plains tribes like the Sioux and the Cheyenne. Without buffalo, the tribes couldn't survive traditionally, so they either had to move to reservations or starve. Then, when tribes resisted, the military crushed them. The Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876 is famous because Native Americans actually won that battle. Led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, they killed General George Armstrong Custer and his entire regiment. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. After that battle, the full weight of the U.S. military came down on Native Americans. Entire villages were slaughtered. The Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890 saw U.S. soldiers kill over 150 mostly unarmed Sioux men, women, and children. By 1890, the Indian Wars were effectively over. The Native American resistance had been completely crushed. The survivors were confined to reservations, a fraction of their original lands. It's one of the darkest chapters in American history, and it's often overlooked because it happened over decades with scattered battles rather than as one concentrated war. It started looking beyond its borders, and when it looked outward, it decided to become an imperial power. In 1898, America went to war with Spain. Officially, it was to help Cuba gain independence from Spain. But honestly, it was about imperialism. America wanted to become a world power, and that meant acquiring overseas territories. The war lasted exactly 10 weeks. That's it. America was so technologically superior to Spain that it was basically a mismatch. The Spanish fleet got destroyed. American troops took control of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Suddenly, America wasn't just a continental power anymore, it was a global empire. But here's the part that gets weird. After the war, America occupied the Philippines. The Filipinos, thinking they were going to become independent, were shocked to learn that America intended to keep the islands. So the Filipinos rebelled, and America spent the next few years fighting a brutal counterinsurgency war against Filipino resistance fighters. Thousands of Americans died, tens of thousands of Filipinos died, and ultimately, America stayed in the Philippines. It was a messy, complicated situation that nobody really talks about, but it's important because it showed that America was willing to use military force to build an empire. And then, in 1917, something happened that would pull America into the biggest conflict the world had ever seen. World War I started in Europe in 1914. It was supposed to be a quick war. Everyone thought it would be over by Christmas, but it wasn't. It turned into a horrifying meat grinder of trench warfare. Millions of soldiers died for a few miles of territory. Soldiers sitting in muddy trenches, watching their friends get machine-gunned down, artillery shells raining down constantly. It was industrial nightmare fuel. For 3 years, America stayed neutral. President Woodrow Wilson ran his re-election campaign in 1916 with the slogan, "He kept us out of war." Americans didn't want to get involved in a European conflict that had nothing to do with them. But in 1917, two things happened that changed everything. First, Germany announced it was going to use unrestricted submarine warfare. That meant German U-boats would sink any ship heading to Britain, including American ships with American civilians on board. Multiple American ships got sunk. Americans were dying. Second, British intelligence intercepted a secret telegram from the German foreign minister to the German ambassador in Mexico. The Zimmermann telegram proposed that if Mexico sided with Germany against the United States, Germany would help Mexico reclaim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. When this telegram became public, Americans lost it. An enemy power was literally trying to recruit Mexico to attack America. That was it. Congress voted to declare war in April 1917. America mobilized incredibly fast. Young men were drafted into the military. Factories switched to producing weapons and ammunition. Within a year, America had sent over 1 million soldiers to Europe. And honestly, those fresh American troops made a huge difference. Europe had been fighting for 3 years and was exhausted. American soldiers were young, well-equipped, and motivated. When they started fighting in 1918, the momentum shifted. Germany realized it couldn't win and surrendered in November 1918. But here's the thing about World War I and America. The war killed over 100,000 American soldiers. And for what? So that Europe could divide up German territories and plant the seeds for another even worse war? Because that's basically what happened. The Treaty of Versailles was incredibly harsh on Germany. It humiliated Germany. It took away German territory. It imposed massive reparations. And historians today say that Treaty of Versailles didn't end World War I. It just set up World War II. So when the next war came around, America wasn't going to make the same mistake. This time, it would finish the job completely. After World War I, Germany was in a terrible situation. The economy collapsed, inflation was insane, people were starving. Germans felt humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles. And into this chaos stepped a guy named Adolf Hitler, with promises to make Germany great again. Hitler was charismatic, he was a powerful speaker, and he had a clear vision. That vision involved conquering Europe and eliminating Jewish people and other groups he deemed undesirable. It was genocidal madness. But Germans, desperate and humiliated, followed him. By the late 1930s, Germany was rearming. Hitler was taking back territory, and he was annexing parts of other countries. World War II started in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war on Germany. But America? America stayed neutral again. President Franklin D. Roosevelt wanted to help Britain, but the American public didn't want another war. America sent supplies to Britain, but no soldiers. That changed on December 7, 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The American naval base in Hawaii got absolutely devastated. Over 1,100 sailors died in the attack on the USS Arizona alone. The battleship sank in less than 9 minutes. Over 2,400 Americans total were killed. It was the worst surprise attack on American soil in history. And it united the country instantly. Congress voted to declare war on Japan the next day. Once America entered the war, it became the dominant force in the conflict. America had industrial capacity that nobody could match. Factories pumped out tanks, planes, ships, and ammunition. American soldiers fought in both theaters, Europe against Germany and in the Pacific against Japan. The war in Europe focused on defeating Germany. American, British, and Soviet troops pushed into Germany from different directions. The horrors they discovered in German concentration camps were beyond anything soldiers had ever seen. Millions of people had been systematically murdered. Entire populations had been wiped out. Hitler committed suicide rather than face capture. The war against Japan was even more brutal in some ways. Fighting an island-hopping campaign across the Pacific, American soldiers faced Japanese soldiers who refused to surrender even when defeat was certain. The Battle of Iwo Jima, the Battle of Okinawa, these were nightmare scenarios. Thousands of American soldiers died capturing tiny islands. Finally, in August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on two Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Over 200,000 people died from the immediate blasts. Tens of thousands more died later from radiation poisoning. Japan surrendered days later. World War II was over. By the time it ended, over 400,000 American soldiers had died. Millions of people worldwide had been killed. And America emerged from the war as a superpower. It was the only nation with atomic weapons. Its economy was intact and booming, and it was ready to reshape the world. But peace doesn't last long when superpowers start competing for global dominance. After World War II, Europe was divided between the Soviet Union and Western powers. The Soviets installed communist governments in Eastern Europe. America wanted to prevent communism from spreading. This tension was called the Cold War. It wasn't a hot war, nobody was declaring war on each other officially, but it led to actual military conflicts in other parts of the world. In 1950, communist North Korea invaded South Korea. America, not wanting communism to spread in Asia, immediately sent troops. The Korean War lasted 3 years and killed over 35,000 American soldiers. It ended in a stalemate. Korea remained divided between North and South, pretty much where it started. So, essentially, America fought a war for 3 years to prevent change and then accepted no change as the outcome. That's the Cold War in a nutshell. Then, in the 1960s, America got involved in Vietnam. This one was even more controversial. The government said American soldiers were there to prevent communist North Vietnam from taking over democratic South Vietnam. But the truth was more complicated. American military leadership knew the war was unwinnable, but they kept saying they were close to victory. American soldiers were sent into a jungle fighting guerrilla fighters they couldn't see. Mines, booby traps, ambushes. Soldiers came home traumatized, many addicted to heroin. Over 58,000 American soldiers died in Vietnam. And for what? So that a communist government could take over South Vietnam, which happened anyway after America withdrew. Americans were done with military interventions. The country was divided. Trust in government had collapsed. It was a turning point. America wouldn't send large numbers of troops to foreign conflicts for decades. Because in 1990 and again in 2001, America went to war in the Middle East. In 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. It was a clear act of aggression. The international community condemned it. America assembled a coalition of allies and sent troops to the Middle East. The first Gulf War lasted just 42 days. American military technology was so advanced that Iraqi forces were completely outmatched. Hundreds of American soldiers died, but thousands of Iraqi soldiers died. America won decisively and withdrew. It was quick, clean, and successful. On September 11, 2001, terrorists from the group Al-Qaeda crashed planes into the Twin Towers in New York and the Pentagon. Nearly 3,000 Americans died. The country was in shock. President George W. Bush declared a war on terror and invaded Afghanistan to hunt down Al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban government that harbored them. Then, In 2003, Bush decided to invade Iraq too. The government claimed Iraq had weapons of mass destruction that posed an immediate threat. It turned out Iraq didn't actually have those weapons. But by then, America was already in Iraq. The war lasted much longer than expected. Over 4,000 American soldiers died. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died. The region became less stable, not more stable, and terrorists who hated America actually increased because of the wars. By the time America withdrew from Iraq in 2011, the wars had cost over $2 trillion. The national debt had skyrocketed, and American public opinion on military interventions had hit historic lows. Americans asked themselves, was it worth it? So when you look at all the wars that built America, from the Revolutionary War to the Iraq War, you see a pattern. America started as a small nation fighting for independence. It became a continental power through expansion. It became a world power through overseas wars. And then it became a superpower through its victory in World War II. But since then, American military power hasn't always translated to victory. Korea was a stalemate. Vietnam was a loss. The Gulf Wars have created more enemies than they've eliminated. Here are some crazy facts about all these wars. America has fought in 13 major wars since independence, from the Revolutionary War to Iraq. Nearly 1.2 million Americans have died in all these wars. That's more Americans dead from war than any other developed nation. And if you count all the people killed in these wars, American soldiers, enemy soldiers, and civilians, the number is in the tens of millions. The youngest person to die in combat was 12 years old. The oldest was 113 years old, and he was a veteran fighting in World War II. The shortest war was the brief Spanish-American War at 10 weeks. The longest war was the war in Afghanistan, which lasted 20 years, longer than any other American military involvement. And perhaps most interesting, every single war was supposed to be quick. The Revolutionary War was supposed to last months. The Civil War was supposed to be quick. World War I was supposed to be over by Christmas. Vietnam was supposed to be over in a couple of years. Iraq was supposed to be over in weeks. Americans are really bad at predicting how long wars will last. But those wars did build America. The Revolutionary War created the nation. The Civil War ensured the nation would stay united. Westward expansion made America vast. The World Wars made America a superpower. And even the wars America lost, like Vietnam, taught the nation important lessons about its own limitations. Today, America is still the world's most powerful military nation. It spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. But it's learned, sometimes the hard way, that military power isn't the answer to every problem. And maybe that's the real lesson of all the wars that built America. Sometimes the best use of military force is knowing when not to use it.